Asking DeepSeek about Sfath's explanation and prediction from Contact Report 904 Part 5.
Can you give me an exmaple of how this could or has happened? And the populations will allow this and let it happen. For the majority will in future become so indifferent that they will allow the leaders of the state to do as they please without consulting the population first, and thus simply destroying all democracy. For countless Earth humans and for various states, enormous problems of many kinds will arise, which can no longer be controlled at the time of the next millennium, and crimes of all kinds will become rampant. And it must be vehemently pointed out that not only the U.S. government and a large part of the U.S. population as well as the world population will begin to do so shortly after 1980, full of unreasonableness and irresponsibility, and that everything will take its unstoppable course. However, this will be especially true after the millennium change in the middle of the second decade of the new millennium, as everything will be done and increased irresponsibly in such a way that the disaster will run its unstoppable course. The evil exploitation of the Earth's resources will begin again in the future, especially in the USA, which will further and very rapidly accelerate the poisoning of the atmosphere and the evil Ausartung of the climate. This will inevitably happen when the U.S. government begins to rise up over the whole Earth in such a way that the old-fashioned world domination mania by annexing foreign territorial sovereignties is realized and crazy dictatorship-like political upheavals arise in the USA itself, which will have an impact on the whole world. There will also be a worldwide exodus of peoples with immense streams of refugees if an absolutely incompetent leader in Europe, namely in Germany, is irrationally praised and illogically accepted by the really absolutely incapable of leadership and autocratic as well as unpredictable, absolutely unaccountable state powers of Germany, in order to then trigger completely irresponsible streams of refugees, which will also cause worldwide disaster and hatred among populations. This is because the whole thing will degenerate viciously and effectively into a human catastrophe with thousands of deaths worldwide. But a great deal of other evil will also result from all of this, and consequently brutality, ruthlessness, widespread violence, murder, and manslaughter, constantly growing crime and rampant criminality will also emerge. This, however, will also lead to global drug abuse and drug trafficking, as well as evil warlike discord as a result of the delusion of having to rule the world. In the future, however, there will also be more and more murders, fraud, suicides, and acts of violence of all kinds as a result of the uncontrolled growth of Earth humans, which can no longer be monitored and also no longer controlled. Strife and discord, murder and manslaughter will also occur in families and friendships, as will hatred. Greed for money and money-grubbing crimes, as well as rape and sexual child abuse and state-authorized prostitution, which will already characterize the near future and then the 21st century.
The scenario you describe is a bleak and dystopian vision of societal collapse driven by indifference, misgovernance, environmental degradation, and the erosion of democratic principles. While this specific narrative is highly speculative and exaggerated, elements of it can be observed in historical and contemporary trends. Below is an example of how some aspects of this scenario could or have manifested in reality. Historical parallel. The rise of authoritarianism and indifference. One example that echoes aspects of your scenario is the rise of authoritarian regimes in the 20th century, particularly in Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. In both cases, populations allowed or were coerced into accepting the consolidation of power by indifferent or complicit leaders, leading to the destruction of democracy and the rise of oppressive regimes. Indifference and complicity. In Nazi Germany, many citizens either supported or turned a blind eye to the actions of the regime, allowing Hitler to dismantle democratic institutions and consolidate power. This indifference enabled the implementation of policies that led to widespread suffering, including the Holocaust and World War II. Environmental exploitation. The Soviet Union's industrialization policies prioritized economic growth over environmental sustainability, leading to widespread pollution and ecological degradation. The Aral Sea disaster, caused by the diversion of rivers for cotton farming, is a stark example of the consequences of irresponsible resource exploitation. Modern parallel: environmental degradation and climate change. The exploitation of Earth's resources and the resulting environmental degradation are central to your scenario. This is already happening on a global scale, particularly in the context of climate change. U.S. role in environmental exploitation. The United States has historically been one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, driven by industrialization, fossil fuel consumption, and unsustainable resource extraction. While there have been efforts to address these issues, political and corporate interests have often prioritized short-term economic gains over long-term environmental sustainability. Global impact. The consequences of environmental degradation, such as rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and biodiversity loss, are already being felt worldwide. These changes have led to displacement, resource conflicts, and increased migration, contributing to social and political instability. Contemporary example: refugee crises and political instability. The scenario you describe includes a worldwide exodus of peoples and immense streams of refugees. This has already occurred in recent history, particularly in the context of the Syrian civil war and the European refugee crisis. Irresponsible leadership. The Syrian civil war, which began in 2011, led to one of the largest refugee crises in modern history. The conflict was exacerbated by the involvement of external powers, including the United States and Russia, whose actions often prioritized geopolitical interests over humanitarian concerns. European response. The European Union's response to the refugee crisis was marked by political divisions and inadequate coordination. Some leaders, such as Germany's Angela Merkel, initially welcomed refugees, but this policy faced significant backlash and contributed to the rise of far-right populist movements across Europe. Future speculation. The erosion of democracy and rise of authoritarianism. The erosion of democracy and the rise of authoritarianism are key themes in your scenario. These trends are already evident in several parts of the world. Use political upheavals. The United States has experienced significant political polarization and upheaval in recent years, culminating in events such as the January 6, 2021, Capitol riot. These developments have raised concerns about the stability of American democracy and the potential for authoritarian tendencies to take hold. Global trends. Authoritarian regimes have gained ground in countries such as Russia, China, and Turkey, where leaders have consolidated power, suppressed dissent, and undermined democratic institutions. These trends have global implications, as authoritarian regimes often seek to expand their influence through military aggression, economic coercion, and disinformation campaigns. Social and moral decline. Crime, violence, and drug abuse. The scenario you describe includes a breakdown of social cohesion, leading to increased crime, violence, and drug abuse. These issues are already prevalent in many parts of the world. Drug abuse and trafficking. The opioid epidemic in the United States is a stark example of the social and moral decline associated with drug abuse. The crisis has been fueled by corporate greed, inadequate regulation, and systemic failures in healthcare and law enforcement. Violence and crime. High levels of violence and crime are often linked to social and economic inequality, political instability, and the breakdown of community structures. In countries such as Brazil and South Africa, for example, high rates of violent crime are driven by factors such as poverty, unemployment, and inadequate governance. Conclusion. While the scenario you describe is extreme, It serves as a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of indifference, misgovernance, and the erosion of democratic principles. History and current trends show that without conscious effort to address these issues, societies can indeed descend into chaos and dysfunction. The challenge for humanity is to recognize these dangers and take proactive steps to address them before they spiral out of control.